Hacker reveals deep web horrors exposed. Chapter 1. The world beneath the surface. Picture the internet as a vast ocean. What most people see, Google, YouTube, social media, online banking, is merely the surface layer, the sunlit shallows that anyone can navigate with a standard browser. Beneath that familiar surface, however, lies something far more extensive and far less understood. Researchers estimate that the content indexed by traditional search engines represents only a tiny fraction of everything that exists online. The rest, databases, private networks, encrypted archives, academic repositories, and much more, makes up what is broadly called the deep web. And beneath even that, hidden in the darkest recesses of the digital ocean, lurks a place that most people will never visit, but almost everyone has heard whispered about: the dark web. This is a place that requires a special browser to enter, a place where identity becomes fluid, where transactions leave no traditional paper trail, and where the laws that govern the rest of civilization seem, at least on the surface, to have no reach. For years, law enforcement agencies around the world struggled to even find their footing inside this labyrinth. They were dealing with technology designed from the ground up to frustrate surveillance, to anonymize users, and to make every server disappear behind layers of encrypted routing that made physical location nearly impossible to determine. But hidden in the shadows of this encrypted underworld, something extraordinary was happening. Ordinary people. A physics graduate student living with roommates in San Francisco, a website designer from a small town in Quebec, a computer programmer in Moscow, were building criminal empires of breathtaking scale. And the horrors they enabled were not merely technical or financial. They reached into the physical world, poisoning communities with synthetic drugs, enabling the exploitation of some of the most vulnerable human beings on Earth, and testing the outer limits of what human depravity could organize and sustain when given the cloak of anonymity. This is the story of how investigators, using cutting-edge digital forensics, undercover infiltrations, international cooperation, and sometimes the very technology their suspects trusted to protect them, tore back the curtain on the deep web's darkest chapters. These are documented cases, real people, real crimes, and real consequences. Every fact you are about to hear is drawn from court documents, official government press, releases, and verified investigative journalism. Nothing has been invented or embellished. The truth, in this case, is more disturbing than any fiction. If you want to keep up with stories like this, the true documented cases behind the headlines that most people never hear about, then subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. We investigate the real stories, the documented facts, the cases that changed history. Every week, we go deeper. Chapter 2. The Architect of the Silk Road. In January 2011, a young man named Ross William Ulbricht was living in Austin, Texas, drifting between ambitions. He had earned a degree in physics from the University of Texas at Dallas, then pursued a graduate program in materials science at Penn State. He had tried day trading. He had run a small online used bookstore. Nothing had quite clicked. By his own account in his private diary, he was searching for something meaningful, a way to make a philosophical statement about freedom and markets and the role of government in human life. What he built instead became one of the most dangerous criminal marketplaces in the history of the internet. Ulbricht was a libertarian, deeply, philosophically committed to the idea that individuals should be free to make their own choices without government interference. In his mind, the drug war was not just a policy failure, but a moral abomination, an act of coercion by the state against consenting adults. He wanted to create a free market, a digital space where people could buy and sell anything they chose, beyond the reach of law enforcement. He named his creation after the ancient trade route that connected civilizations across Eurasia for centuries, the Silk Road. The technology he used was sophisticated for its time. The Silk Road ran on the Tor network, a system originally developed by the United States Naval Research Laboratory to protect intelligence communications and later released publicly. Tor routes internet traffic through a chain of volunteer-operated servers around the world, encrypting data at each step and making it extraordinarily difficult to trace the origin or destination of any given communication. By hosting the Silk Road as a hidden service on the Tor network, Ulbricht was able to conceal the physical location of his servers. And he required all transactions to be conducted in Bitcoin, the still young cryptocurrency whose public ledger recorded every transaction, but whose wallet addresses were not inherently tied to real-world identities. The Silk Road launched in February 2011 and began small, a handful of listings, mostly for psychedelic mushrooms advertised by early members of online drug harm reduction forums. But word spread quickly. In June 2011, just a few months after launch, the influential blog Gorka published a feature article about the site, and traffic exploded virtually overnight. What had been a modest experiment became a global marketplace almost instantly. Ulbricht found himself running something he had not fully anticipated. Not just an ideological statement, but a business empire. And what a business it was. By the time FBI agents shut it down in October 2013, the Silk Road had facilitated sales totaling more than 9.5 million bitcoins, a figure that investigators estimated represented approximately $1.2 billion in transactions. Ulbricht himself, operating under the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts, a character from the 1987 film The Princess Bride, a figure of feared and mysterious power, had collected commissions worth approximately $80 million. His marketplace listed thousands of drug varieties from dealers around the world. It employed a staff of paid online administrators. It had an automated escrow payment system, a feedback and rating system for vendors, and customer service protocols. The FBI would later describe it as the most sophisticated and extensive criminal marketplace on the internet. But the Silk Road was not merely a drug market. By September 2013, court documents would reveal that the site also hosted 159 listings for hacking services, offers to break into social media accounts, email systems, and corporate networks. It offered 801 listings for digital goods, including malicious software and hacked accounts. It offered 169 listings for forgeries, fake driver's licenses, counterfeit passports, fabricated social security cards, counterfeit utility bills, and buried in private forums. According to prosecutors, there were discussions of murder for hire. Ulbricht allegedly paid out $730,000 to have at least 5 people killed, though investigators would later determine that no contracted killing ever actually took place. For 2.5 years, Ulbricht operated with remarkable discipline. He maintained multiple separate digital identities, kept his real name entirely off the platform, used encrypted communications for all business matters, and ran his servers through Iceland and other jurisdictions he believed would insulate him from American law enforcement reach. He was careful, he was meticulous, and he was watched from a distance he could not perceive by a growing coalition of federal agencies that included the FBI, the DEA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Internal Revenue Service. Chapter 3. The Trail of Breadcrumbs. The investigation that brought down Ross Ulbricht is a masterclass in how a single small mistake, made years before its consequences become apparent, can unravel the most carefully constructed criminal operation in the world. The man who ultimately found the crucial link was not an elite FBI cyber agent or an NSA data analyst. He was an IRS criminal investigation special agent named Gary Alford, who worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration and who, on his own time, developed an unconventional analytical approach to a problem that had stumped his colleagues for years. Alford's methodology was deceptively simple. Rather than trying to penetrate the Tor network or crack the encryption protecting the Silk Road servers, he looked at the public internet. He asked a question that sounds almost too basic. Before the Silk Road became famous, before it had thousands of members and a feature article. In Gawker, someone must have advertised it somewhere. Someone must have mentioned it, promoted it, tried to attract initial users. And that someone, in those early days before they had reason to be paranoid, might have used an account connected to their real identity. Alfred searched systematically through online forums and message boards for the earliest known references to the Silk Road website. He found them attached to a username called Altoid, a user who had posted about the Silk Road on a forum for magic mushroom enthusiasts in January 2011. The same Altoid username appeared elsewhere on the internet, including on a Bitcoin developer forum where the user had posted about Silk Road in its early days. And then, on that same forum, Alfred found something extraordinary. A post in which the user Altoid had advertised for a computer programmer to help with a startup, and had directed interested applicants to contact him via a Gmail address. The Gmail address contained Ross Ulbricht's full name. 8 months passed between the discovery of that original Silk Road forum post and its connection to Ulbricht's real identity. But by the summer of 2013, the pieces were coming together with accelerating momentum. A Homeland Security investigator named Jared Deryegiayan had spent over a year undercover on the Silk Road, working his way up through the site's administrative hierarchy until he was in direct digital contact with Dread Pirate Roberts himself. Each time they communicated, Deryegiayan noted the time zone of the activity, consistently Pacific time, narrowing the suspect's location to the western United States. Separately, a law enforcement seizure of a Silk Road server, obtained through traditional international legal cooperation, had yielded a configuration detail. The server's administrator account was named Frosty, and the server itself was named Frosty. When Alfred mentioned this detail to the FBI's New York cyber team, the room went quiet. Someone had already found the same username on a YouTube account belonging to Ross Ulbricht. In his chat logs with Deryegiayan, Ulbricht had spelled the word yes as Y-E-A, and Ulbricht's YouTube page showed him spelling it the exact same way. The pattern of digital fingerprints was becoming irrefutable. On October 1st, 2013, FBI agents positioned themselves at the Glen Park branch of the San Francisco Public Library, where surveillance had tracked Ulbricht. He was there with his laptop, actively logged into the Silk Road servers, managing the marketplace in real time. 2 agents created a commotion nearby to distract him. In the moment he turned to look, a 3rd agent lunged forward and physically grabbed the laptop before Ulbricht could activate any shutdown protocol. The laptop was open. He was logged in. The evidence was live and unencrypted on the machine. What followed was staggering. The FBI seized 26,000 bitcoins from Silk Road accounts at the time of arrest, worth approximately $3.6 million at then-current prices. They later seized an additional 144,000 bitcoins belonging to Ulbricht personally, worth $28.5 million at the time of arrest. And in November 2020, more than 7 years after Ulbricht's arrest, investigators seized yet another trove, over $1 billion in digital currency from wallets associated with the Silk Road case, making it at that point the single largest cryptocurrency seizure in the history of the United States Department of Justice. In 2015, Ross Ulbricht was convicted on all counts, engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, distributing narcotics, computer hacking, and money laundering. Judge Catherine Forrest sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The supposed anonymity of the dark web, the prosecutor declared, was not a protective shield from justice. The digital breadcrumbs had led them all the way home. Chapter 4. Operation Bayonet. The Trap Within a Trap. If the fall of the Silk Road was the opening chapter in law enforcement's war against the dark web, then what happened in July 2017 was the most audacious single operation ever conducted against darknet criminal infrastructure. A multi-layered deception so sophisticated that it not only destroyed its primary target, but used the panic created by that destruction to ensnare thousands of criminals who thought they had escaped to safety. By 2017, the dark web drug marketplace landscape had evolved enormously since the Silk Road. The ecosystem was larger, more decentralized, more security conscious, and far more technically sophisticated. The dominant marketplace had become Alphabay, and its administrator was a 25-year-old French-Canadian named Alexandre Cazes, who had grown up in Quebec, and who, by his mid-20s, was living in Bangkok, Thailand, in a luxury villa, driving a Porsche and a Lamborghini, vacationing at high-end resorts across Southeast Asia, and advertising his wealth on social media with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself utterly untouchable. Cazes had created Alphabay in December 2014, and built it into something that dwarfed the Silk Road in every measurable dimension. At its peak, Alphabay had over 40,000 vendors and more than 200,000 registered users. It hosted over 250,000 listings for illegal drugs and toxic chemicals, along with more than 100,000 additional listings for stolen identities, counterfeit documents, hacking tools, malware, and firearms. Its annual sales volume was estimated to be nearly 10 times that of the Silk Road at its peak. Attorney General Jeff Sessions would later call its takedown the largest dark web criminal market seizure in history. The investigation that brought Cazes down began not with quantum computing or exotic intelligence techniques, but with something laughably mundane: a password reset email. When Alphabay was first established, the system was configured to send automated welcome emails and password recovery messages to new users. Those emails, in their earliest days, listed a return address in the from field. That address was pimpalex991hotmail.com. Cazes had used that same email address, which he had registered publicly on a tech forum as far back as 2008, to create his LinkedIn profile, his PayPal account, and his legitimate small computer repair business in Canada. By the time investigators connected these dots, the case against him was effectively complete. On July 5, 2017, Thai police, working at the request of the FBI and DEA, moved on Cazes' villa in Bangkok. They caught him at his computer, actively logged in to the Alphabay administrative panel. He had been rebooting a server that law enforcement had deliberately triggered an artificial failure on. They had engineered the problem specifically to force him to open his laptop and log in, capturing him in the act. His laptop was on, unlocked, and entirely unencrypted. On it, investigators found passwords for Alphabay, its servers, and multiple associated online identities. They also found something extraordinary: an unencrypted personal net worth statement, meticulously organized, mapping out all of Cazes' assets across multiple jurisdictions around the world. His properties, his cryptocurrency holdings, his vehicles, his businesses. It was a complete roadmap to everything he owned, offered voluntarily in a file he had apparently never thought to protect. The FBI and DEA seized millions of dollars in cryptocurrency from Alphabay's servers, including at least 1,143 Bitcoin, 8,669 Ethereum, 3,691 Zcash, and nearly 12,000 Monero. They seized luxury vehicles, residences across Southeast Asia, and Cazes' stake in a hotel in Thailand. His total personal wealth was estimated at approximately $23 million, accumulated entirely through criminal commissions over just 2.5 years. On July 12, 2017, 1 week after his arrest and days before his scheduled extradition to the United States, Alexandre Cazes was found dead in his cell at Thailand's Narcotics Suppression Bureau headquarters in Bangkok. Thai authorities determined that he had hanged himself. He was 25 years old, but the operation that would bear the name Bayonet was not finished. In fact, its most remarkable component had not yet been revealed. While the FBI was preparing its action against Alphabay, investigators at Europol had provided Dutch law enforcement with intelligence about another major dark web marketplace called Hansa Market. The Dutch team had located Hansa's servers through a combination of forensic techniques, including the discovery of a development version of the site that its administrators had carelessly left exposed, and through old IRC chat logs that the administrators had left on their servers containing, astonishingly, their full legal names. On June 20th, 2017, German police arrested Hansa's 2 administrators, both German citizens, and Dutch authorities took covert control of the entire marketplace. They impersonated the administrators. They kept the site running, exactly as normal, while secretly recording everything that happened on it. They modified the site's PGP encryption convenience feature to capture plain text copies of encrypted messages before encryption was applied. They altered the site's automatic photo metadata removal tool to record geolocation data before stripping it. They changed the password system to record user passwords in plain text, allowing investigators to attempt those same passwords on other dark web platforms. And they kept all of this completely secret. Then, on July 4th, the FBI shut down Alphabay. The dark web erupted in panic. Hundreds of thousands of criminals who had used Alphabay as their primary marketplace scrambled for an alternative. Hansa was the obvious choice. It was the 3rd largest platform, it was still running, and it appeared trustworthy. Within days, Hansa's user numbers increased by 800% as Alphabay refugees flooded in. They were walking directly into a trap. Every transaction they completed, every message they sent, every photograph they uploaded, every password they used, all of it was being recorded by Dutch law enforcement, who were patiently collecting intelligence on an unprecedented scale. The FBI even posted on Reddit that Alphabay was merely down for maintenance to encourage more criminals to migrate to Hansa. On July 20th, 2017, Attorney General Jeff Sessions appeared at a press conference in Washington and announced the takedown of Alphabay. Simultaneously, Dutch authorities shut down Hansa and revealed what had happened. By the time it was over, Europol had gathered 10,000 postal addresses of Hansa customers and tens of thousands of encrypted messages, now readable in plain text. Hundreds of new criminal investigations were launched worldwide. The dark web had been shaken to its foundations. Chapter 5. The Hydra that bled billions. While American and European law enforcement were dismantling Alphabay and Hansa, a different kind of dark web empire was growing quietly in the Russian-speaking world, one that would eventually dwarf everything that had come before it in terms of scale, financial volume, and structural sophistication. This was Hydra Market, and the story of its rise and fall stretches across 7 years, 3 continents, and what investigators would ultimately estimate at $5.2 billion in criminal transactions. Hydra was founded in 2015 and operated almost exclusively within the Russian-speaking world, primarily Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. From the beginning, it was more than a simple marketplace. Hydra was a criminal financial ecosystem. It offered drugs of virtually every category: cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, LSD, opioids, but also stolen credit card data, counterfeit currency, falsified identification documents, hacking services, and something unique. Among dark web platforms, a Bitcoin bank mixer, a sophisticated service that obscured cryptocurrency transaction trails and made blockchain tracing significantly more difficult for investigators. What made Hydra particularly innovative and particularly dangerous was its delivery system. Rather than shipping drugs through the postal system, the method used by Silk Road and Alphabay vendors, which had always been a vulnerability because postal inspectors could intercept packages, Hydra used a network of physical dead drops. Customers who purchased drugs received GPS coordinates and precise written instructions directing them to hidden locations behind a specific dumpster in a specified alleyway. beneath a particular bench in a named city park, under a loose stone near a landmark. The drugs had been hidden there in advance by local distributors. The customer would retrieve the package without ever meeting a human being. This model, which the Russian criminal underworld called zakladka, meaning dead drop, made interdiction extraordinarily difficult. The operation was built on a principle of radical compartmentalization. Each participant in the supply chain knew only their own role. The customer who retrieved a dead drop did not know the person who placed it. That distributor did not know their supervisor. Their supervisor did not know the supplier. This layered structure, borrowed from traditional organized crime tradecraft, meant that even if law enforcement captured one participant, they could not roll up the entire chain. And for years, this insulation held. Hydra operated from 2015 to 2022 with virtually no significant law enforcement disruption. By 2020, Hydra's reported sales exceeded 1.23 billion euros in a single year. By 2021, Hydra alone accounted for an estimated 80% of all cryptocurrency transactions conducted on darknet markets globally, a figure that underscores just how dominant this single platform had become in the illegal digital economy. It had approximately 17 million registered customer accounts and over 19,000 active vendor accounts. It had customer service infrastructure, legal advisory services for vendors, and medical guidance resources. Security researchers who analyzed Hydra described it as operating with the sophistication of a major e-commerce company, complete with performance metrics, quality control systems, and a 5-star vendor rating mechanism. The takedown of Hydra began in August 2021, when German and American law enforcement initiated a coordinated investigation. Germany's Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, led the European component, while the United States Department of Justice coordinated the American side. The key to the operation was locating Hydra's servers, which investigators eventually traced to Germany despite the platform's Russian origins. On April 5, 2022, German authorities seized those servers and seized cryptocurrency wallets containing approximately $25.3 million in Bitcoin. The shutdown of Hydra sent shockwaves through the global darknet market ecosystem. Researchers estimated that total darknet market revenues dropped from approximately $2.6 billion in 2021 to just $1.3 billion in 2022, a decline of 50% attributable almost entirely to Hydra's removal. The vacuum it left created what one researcher called a Cambrian explosion of competing Russian-language dark web markets, with at least a dozen new platforms emerging within months to fill the gap. The legal consequences continued for years. In December 2024, a Russian court handed down a sentence of life in prison to the platform's suspected founder, Stanislav Moiseyev, with 15 co-conspirators, receiving sentences ranging from 8 to 23 years in maximum security penal colonies. A historic verdict in a country that had, for years, been accused of tolerating cybercriminal activity within its borders as long as it targeted foreign victims. Chapter 6. The Playpen Operation and the Ghost in the machine. Not all of the horrors lurking in the dark web's depths were commercial in the way that drug markets were commercial. Some of the worst things investigators encountered in their years of infiltration and surveillance existed not to generate profit in the conventional sense, but to serve a darkness that has no economic justification. Networks devoted entirely to the sexual exploitation of children. These investigations are the most disturbing in the history of digital law enforcement, and the operations that dismantled them required tactics that pushed the legal boundaries of what governments are permitted to do in the name of child protection. By 2014, the FBI had become aware of a dark website called Playpen, accessible only through the Tor network, that functioned as a child sexual abuse material forum, a community of tens of thousands of members sharing images and videos of child victims, discussing methods of grooming and abusing children, and operating with the confidence of a group that believed its encryption made it invincible. Playpen was not a small operation. At its peak, it had over 150,000 registered members worldwide. In February 2015, working with international partners, the FBI seized control of Playpen's servers. But rather than immediately shutting the site down, federal agents made a decision that would generate intense legal debate for years afterward. They kept Playpen running, operated from an FBI facility in Virginia for approximately 2 weeks. During that time, they deployed what the Bureau termed a network investigative technique, a piece of malware delivered automatically to the computers of every user who logged into the site. The malware exploited a vulnerability in the Tor browser, itself a modified version of Firefox, to force users' computers to transmit their true IP addresses, MAC addresses and identifying information outside the anonymized Tor network directly to FBI servers. The results were staggering in both scope and disturbing content. The FBI identified over 1,000 individual computers whose users had logged into Playpen during those 2 weeks. What followed was one of the largest coordinated waves of search warrants in FBI history, executed across multiple states and coordinated with international partners. Among those arrested and subsequently convicted were individuals whose positions of public trust made their crimes all the more chilling: a pediatrician, a professor, a former bank executive, a federal drug enforcement agent, a public school administrator, a math teacher, and a preschool teacher. The investigation also identified and rescued more than a dozen children who had been depicted in abuse images on the site. The legal controversy surrounding the operation was significant. Defense attorneys argued in dozens of subsequent prosecutions that the FBI's deployment of malware constituted a warrantless search, that a single warrant issued in Virginia could not authorize the hacking of computers located in jurisdictions around the world. Courts split on the question. Some evidence was suppressed in some jurisdictions. The episode forced the federal government to seek changes to Rule 41 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, expanding judicial authority to authorize the hacking of computers in remote and unspecified locations, a change that itself generated fierce debate among privacy advocates and civil liberties organizations. The technical details of how the FBI had penetrated the Tor network in this and related operations remained classified for years. In the case of Eric Eowyn Marquez, an Irish-American who ran a dark web hosting service called Freedom Hosting that at various points hosted drug markets, hacking groups, money laundering operations, and what investigators described as millions of images of child sexual abuse. Marquez was arrested in Ireland in 2013 after investigators somehow located a crucial server in France, piercing the layers of Tor anonymization he had constructed. His defense attorneys received only vague details about the investigative techniques employed, because those techniques were, as the government noted in court filings, classified. Marquez eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 27 years in federal prison. Chapter 7. The Dream Board. Horror. Operation Delego. The same year that investigators were beginning to pursue the Silk Road in earnest, another investigation was reaching its conclusion, one that exposed a criminal network so methodically organized in the service of human evil that its details remain almost impossible to process. Operation Delego was launched in December 2009 by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Homeland Security Investigations Division, in coordination with dozens of law enforcement agencies on 5 continents. Its target was a site called Dreamboard. Dreamboard was not a marketplace in any conventional sense. It was an invitation-only online bulletin board created and operated for a single purpose: to promote the sexual abuse of very young children. The site's membership requirements were explicitly criminal in nature. To gain and maintain access, members were required to upload new material depicting child sexual abuse at least once every 50 days. The site awarded status and recognition to members who produced original abuse content, particularly content involving children under 12 and including infants. A tiered system of access privileges incentivized members to create new abuse material rather than simply distributing existing images. When investigators finally mapped the full scope of the operation, they estimated that Dreamboard's server may have served as a vehicle for the distribution of up to 123 terabytes of child pornography, a quantity that the Department of Homeland Security described as roughly equivalent to the content of 16,000 DVDs, and which represented the largest child exploitation data seizure in DHS history at that time. Due to the extensive encryption involved in the platform's operation, only 72 charges were filed against the approximately 600 known members of Dreamboard. The investigation reached individuals in 13 countries across 5 continents. Arrests were made in Canada, Denmark, Ecuador, France, Germany, Hungary, Kenya, the Netherlands, the Philippines, Qatar, Serbia, Sweden, and Switzerland, in addition to dozens of arrests within the United States. 20 of those charged were known only by their online handles and remained at large, identified only as John Does in their indictments. The sentences handed down in the Delago prosecutions were severe. Multiple defendants received sentences between 20 and 30 years. One defendant in Alabama received a sentence of 30 years in federal prison. At the time, Delago represented the largest prosecution in the United States. History of individuals who had participated in an online bulletin board conceived and operated for the sole purpose of promoting child sexual abuse. Attorney General Eric Holder described what investigators had uncovered as a demented dream, the attempt to create an organized international community dedicated to the normalization and expansion of child exploitation. Chapter 8. Operation Blacklist. 50 children rescued. In 2018, investigators at Interpol made a discovery that launched what would become one of the largest coordinated international child rescue operations in history. Material depicting the sexual abuse of children had been traced back to a subscription-based dark website, accessible through encrypted software, protected by multiple layers of anonymization. With a user base that would eventually be counted at 63,000 members worldwide. The site was hidden deep within the dark web's architecture, accessible only to those who knew its specific address and possessed the technical capability to access the Tor network. The primary administrator of the site was eventually identified as Montri Salangam, a Thai national who operated the platform as a commercial enterprise, charging subscription fees in exchange for access to thousands of abuse images and videos. In early 2018, Thai police, working in coordination with Interpol and the United States Department of Homeland Security, arrested Salangam and seized his servers. The digital evidence recovered from those servers pointed investigators toward users in nearly 60 countries, triggering parallel investigations on every inhabited continent. Operation Blacklist, as the coordinated investigation was designated, ultimately resulted in the arrest of 9 individuals in Thailand, Australia, and the United States, and the rescue of 50 children who had been identified through images shared on the site. Investigators were working to identify an additional 100 children whose images had appeared in distributed content. One of those arrested in the United States had been using his position of trust to abuse a 2-year-old child in his care. Interpol's Secretary General Jürgen Stock declared at the time of the arrests that Operation Blacklist sent a clear message to those abusing children and producing exploitation material. Law enforcement could see them, even in the deepest corners of the dark web, and they would be brought to justice. Chapter 9. Operation Grayskull. The most recent reckoning. As recently as July 2025, the Department of Justice announced the results of Operation Grayskull, a sweeping joint effort between federal prosecutors and the FBI that resulted in the dismantling of 4 separate dark websites dedicated to child sexual abuse material and the conviction of 18 individuals, including multiple site administrators and content producers. The investigation had taken years and spanned multiple continents, with arrests extending to Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Italy, Estonia, Belgium, and South Africa. One of the central figures in the operation was a man known in the indictments as Boss, whose real name was Spearman, and who had been designated by the Department of Justice as one of the most significant distributors of child sexual abuse material in the world. The FBI's search warrant for his arrest was considered so high value that it was personally approved by the FBI director. When agents breached his door with tactical explosives, Spearman physically fought back, struggling with agents while 3 of his handguns remained within reach. On his desk, he was eventually subdued and handcuffed. The devices on his desk, prosecutors noted, contained what a sentencing memo described as massive quantities of evidence confirming his role as lead administrator of a major abuse network, along with an enormous collection of images and videos depicting the rape and abuse of children. He was sentenced to life in prison. Another conviction in the same operation involved a man named Garrel, whose conduct prosecutors described as engaging in an extremely complex and technologically sophisticated conspiracy that far exceeded the typical child exploitation offense. Among the evidence recovered was what prosecutors called a predator's handbook, detailed written instructions for grooming children for future abuse. The network he had participated in had, according to FBI Deputy Assistant Director Chris Del Zotto, constituted an online community of hundreds of thousands of people with leadership roles, rules, and a common dedicated purpose, organized around the sexual exploitation of children with the discipline and structure of a functioning organization. FBI Director Kash Patel stated that Operation Grayskull represented one of the most significant strikes ever made against online child exploitation networks. Chapter 10. The Anatomy of Capture, How They Always Get Caught. There is a recurring pattern in the documented history of dark web criminal enterprises, and it is both fascinating and revealing. In almost every major case, the ultimate undoing of even the most technically sophisticated operator came not from a breakthrough in cryptographic analysis or from the decryption of Tor's layered anonymization, but from human error. The dark web's technical infrastructure, at its best, is extraordinarily difficult to penetrate. But the humans who use it, brilliant, meticulous, ruthlessly operational, are still human, and humans make mistakes. Ross Ulbricht, who built the Silk Road with extraordinary technical care, posted his real Gmail address on a public forum when he was advertising for a programmer in the site's earliest days. A single post, made before he had reason to be careful, connected his real identity to his criminal pseudonym 2 years later. Alexandre Cazes, who ran Alphabay with the operational security awareness of someone who had studied his predecessor's failures, used a personal Hotmail address that he had created as a teenager and had publicly associated with his real name in tech forums and on LinkedIn as the return address for his site's automated welcome emails. The Hansa administrators, who took every precaution in their day-to-day operations, left old chat logs on their servers that included their full legal names. Secret Service Supervisory Criminal Investigator Ken Henderson, who has spent years investigating dark web financial crimes, described the pattern to journalists. Sometimes not when criminals are doing the crime, but when they are just online doing their own personal thing, they mix up accounts. Maybe historically they forgot they signed up for an account when they were young and used their real name. It is these small breadcrumbs that allow investigators to put together a picture of who a person actually is. The breadcrumbs are often separated by years. They are often buried under layers of subsequent digital activity, but they are almost always there, waiting. Law enforcement has also developed extraordinary technical capabilities that complement this human error analysis. The blockchain, the public ledger that records every Bitcoin transaction in history, has proven to be one of the most powerful forensic tools in the investigative arsenal. While Bitcoin's pseudonymous wallet system initially appeared to offer robust financial privacy, cryptocurrency tracing firms and federal investigators developed techniques for de-anonymizing blockchain transactions by analyzing patterns of movement, connecting wallet addresses to known exchange accounts, and correlating transaction timing with other available data. FBI Special Agent Hicks, who worked on dark web drug cases, explained publicly that cryptocurrency has exposure points. It is not truly anonymous, and there are things investigators can exploit to find out who people are. International cooperation has been equally transformative. The most successful dark web investigations of the past decade have uniformly been joint operations involving multiple agencies across multiple countries. The FBI and DEA working with Europol, Thai police, Dutch authorities, German federal investigators, Interpol, and dozens of national agencies. Former FBI Assistant Director Joseph Campbell noted that the intelligence gathered from seized dark web platforms, users' names and phone numbers, email and IP addresses, banking and wire transfer information, creates cascading investigative leads that can sustain dozens of prosecutions for years after an initial takedown. Chapter 11. The Endless Frontier. One of the most sobering aspects of the documented history of dark web crime and its suppression is the persistence of the ecosystem. Every major dark web marketplace that has been taken down, the Silk Road, Alphabet, Hansa, Hydra, has been replaced within weeks or months by successors. When the FBI shut down the Silk Road in October 2013, Silk Road 2.0 came online within a month, operated by former administrators of the original. When Alphabet and Hansa were simultaneously destroyed in July 2017, users flooded into dozens of alternative markets. When Hydra was seized in April 2022, researchers documented an immediate Cambrian explosion of new Russian-language platforms competing for the billions in commerce that Hydra had handled. FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe acknowledged publicly that the work of dark web enforcement sometimes felt like playing whack-a-mole. Take down one marketplace, and others immediately emerge to fill the vacuum. The technical barriers to launching a new dark web marketplace are not insurmountable for anyone with sufficient technical skill and criminal intent. The Tor network continues to function. Cryptocurrency continues to provide pseudonymous transaction capability. Encrypted communications tools continue to be freely available. The fundamental architecture that enables dark web crime remains intact and will remain intact for the foreseeable future. And yet the cumulative effect of law enforcement action has been significant. The documented cases described in this video represent the seizure of billions of dollars in criminal assets, the incarceration of some of the most prolific criminal operators in internet history, and, most importantly, the rescue of hundreds of children from ongoing abuse. Every major operation has generated intelligence, leading to dozens of subsequent investigations. The global law enforcement apparatus dedicated to dark web crime has grown enormously since the FBI first stumbled across the Silk Road in January 2011, and the tools available to investigators in blockchain analytics, in digital forensics, in international cooperation frameworks have advanced proportionally. The people who built these criminal empires were not cartoonish villains. Ross Ulbricht was a physics-educated idealist who genuinely believed he was building a freer world. Alexandra Cazes was a skilled website designer and entrepreneur who channeled his abilities into criminal enterprise. The operators of Hydra built something that functioned in its internal architecture like a sophisticated technology company. What they all shared was the belief, ultimately disproven in every case, that the technical barriers of the dark web made them unreachable. That anonymity was the same as invulnerability. That the gap between their digital identities and their physical persons was unbridgeable. It was not. It never was. The breadcrumbs were always there. The investigators, patient, methodical, operating across time zones and jurisdictions and years, were always following them. The dark web promised its inhabitants something it could never deliver: true invisibility. And the documented history of law enforcement's pursuit of its worst actors is, in the end, the story of how every promise of perfect concealment eventually meets the stubborn reality that human beings make mistakes, and that those mistakes, however small, are enough. Chapter 12. The Legacy and the Lesson. There is a moment in almost every documented dark web takedown story, a pivot point where the investigative narrative shifts from uncertainty to inevitability, that reveals something profound about the relationship between technology and human behavior. It is the moment when the technical brilliance of a criminal operation collides with the single thing that technical brilliance cannot fully compensate for: the fallibility of the person at the center of it. Ross Ulbricht sat in a San Francisco library, managing a billion-dollar criminal empire from a laptop, while FBI agents waited for their moment a few tables away. Alexandre Cazes was logged into his criminal marketplace's administrative panel when police knocked on his door in Bangkok, his laptop open and unlocked on the table in front of him. The administrators of Hansa Market had left their real names in old chat logs on the same servers they trusted to protect their identities. The operator of Freedom Hosting had trusted a network that an adversary had already found a way to partially penetrate. In every case, the thing that undid them was not the darkness of what they had done, but the ordinariness of how they had done it. The documented history of the dark web also reveals something important about the nature of the crimes it enabled. The anonymity of the dark web did not create human evil. The desire for drugs, for counterfeit documents, for illegal weapons, for the exploitation of children, these existed long before the internet and will exist long after whatever technological innovation eventually supersedes the Tor network. What the dark web did was remove friction. It created a global marketplace for transactions that had previously been limited by geography, by trust, and by the practical difficulties of anonymous exchange. It lowered the barriers to participation for both criminals and their customers, and it concentrated criminal networks in ways that, paradoxically, also made them more vulnerable to the kind of sophisticated infiltration and takedown that law enforcement eventually learned to execute. The investigators who brought down the Silk Road spent years on a case that many of their colleagues doubted would ever produce results. The teams that infiltrated Hansa Market operated for months undercover, monitoring thousands of criminal transactions, building intelligence files, waiting for precisely the right moment to trigger the collapse they had so carefully engineered. The agents who raided Spearman's apartment in pursuit of a warrant, personally approved by the FBI director, fought physically with an armed man who knew what capture meant for him. These are not abstract policy successes. They are the product of years of human effort, technical ingenuity, and moral commitment by people who decided that the dark web's promise of impunity was a challenge they could not walk away from. The lesson that the documented history of the dark web teaches is not that technology is neutral. It is not. The architecture of the dark web was built specifically to enable anonymity, and that anonymity has real costs in human suffering that cannot be minimized or rationalized away. The lesson is not that law enforcement always wins. It does not, and the dark web's ecosystem continues to evolve and adapt faster than any single agency can track. The lesson is that the digital world, for all its apparent abstraction, is still operated by human beings, and human beings, no matter how skilled, no matter how careful, no matter how convinced of their own invulnerability, eventually leave a breadcrumb, and someone, somewhere, will follow it. The horror that investigators found in the dark web's depths was real. The courage and persistence required to go after it, to spend years building cases against people who had done everything possible to make themselves unreachable, was equally real. The documented history of that pursuit is one of the most consequential chapters in the history of crime and law enforcement, and its final pages have not yet been written. The dark web is still out there. The investigations are still ongoing. And somewhere right now, a federal agent is following a breadcrumb that someone, in a moment of ordinary human carelessness, left behind.